Carla had always been fascinated by the abandoned asylum on the edge of town. As a teenager, she and her friends would dare each other to sneak inside and explore the dark, decaying halls. Years later, Carla still couldn't shake the feeling that the asylum was calling out to her. One night, unable to resist the pull any longer, she snuck inside, hoping to find some long-forgotten relic or secret hiding place. As she made her way down a long, dimly lit hallway, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind her. Turning around, she saw a figure in the shadows, shrouded in darkness. Carla tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear as the figure stepped closer, revealing itself to be a ghostly apparition with glowing eyes and a twisted grin. The ghostly figure beckoned her forward, leading her deeper into the asylum, through dark and winding corridors. Carla was terrified, but she couldn't help feeling a strange sense of fascination and wonder as she followed the ghost deeper into the heart of the asylum. As they reached the end of the hallway, the ghostly figure stopped and turned to face her. It spoke, its voice a haunting whisper that sent chills down Carla's spine. "You've come too far," it said. "You cannot leave." Carla screamed, but the ghostly figure vanished into the shadows, leaving her alone in the asylum. She tried to run, but found herself trapped in a labyrinth of corridors and rooms. For days, Carla wandered the halls, lost and alone. She began to see strange things, shadows moving on the walls, ghostly whispers in her ear. She knew that she was losing her grip on reality, but she couldn't escape the asylum's grip. Years later, the police found Carla's body in the abandoned asylum, her eyes wide with terror and her face twisted into a permanent scream. The cause of death was never determined, but many locals believed that the ghostly figure had claimed another victim. Emily had always been afraid of the old abandoned mansion at the end of the street. The house was rumored to be haunted by the ghost of its former owner, a wealthy woman who had been brutally murdered by her own family. One night, Emily and her friends dared each other to sneak inside and explore the house. They laughed nervously as they tiptoed through the dark, cobweb-filled halls, telling each other ghost stories and jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. As they made their way up to the second floor, they heard a strange noise, a scratching sound, like something trying to claw its way through the walls. Emily's friends ran for the stairs, but Emily was frozen in place, too terrified to move. The scratching grew louder and more frenzied, until finally the wall gave way and a ghostly hand reached out and grabbed her by the throat. Emily tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips as the ghostly apparition dragged her deeper into the house, through twisting corridors and secret passages. Finally, they reached the master bedroom, where the ghostly figure released its grip on Emily's throat and disappeared into the shadows. Emily was alone in the room, surrounded by old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Suddenly, she heard a voice whisper in her ear, a voice that sounded like it was coming from beyond the grave. "Why have you come here?" the voice asked. Emily tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She was trembling with fear as the ghostly figure materialized in front of her, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "You should not have come here," the ghost said. "Now you will never leave." Emily screamed as the ghostly figure advanced on her, its hands reaching out to claim her soul. The mansion was never again visited by anyone, as the rumors of the curse. Mike had been working at the cemetery for years. He knew every inch of the place, from the oldest headstones to the newest graves. He had seen his fair share of spooky sights in the graveyard, but nothing had ever prepared him for what he encountered one night. It was a warm summer evening, and Mike was doing his usual rounds, checking on the graves and making sure everything was in order. As he made his way through the rows of headstones, he noticed something strange. One of the graves appeared to be glowing. At first, Mike thought it was just a trick of the light, but as he got closer, He realized that the glow was coming from the grave itself. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest, and peered down into the open grave. To his horror, he saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. They were the eyes of a ghostly figure, who had risen from the grave and was now standing right in front of Mike. Mike tried to run, but the ghostly figure was too quick. It reached out and grabbed him by the arm, pulling him down into the open grave. Mike tumbled headfirst into the hole, landing hard on the dirt and bones that filled the bottom of the pit. He struggled to his feet, his heart racing, and tried to climb out of the grave. But the ghostly figure was too strong. It held him in place, its cold, clammy hands clutching at his throat. Mike gasped for air, his vision growing hazy, as the ghostly figure whispered in his ear. "You have disturbed my rest," it said. "Now you will suffer the consequences." Mike tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips as the ghostly figure dragged him down into the darkness of the grave. From that day on, the other cemetery workers avoided the grave where Mike had disappeared, too afraid to disturb a restless spirit that haunted the area. Captain John and his crew were sailing their freight ship across the Atlantic Ocean when a terrible storm hit. The winds howled and the waves crashed against the ship, threatening it to capsize it at any moment. As the night wore on, the storm grew worse. The crew huddled together, trying to keep warm and dry. They could barely see a few feet in front of them through the driving rain and the dense fog. Suddenly, something loomed out of the mist. It was another ship, but this one was unlike any ship the crew had ever seen. It was old and decrepit, with tattered sails and rusted chains. The ship seemed to be drifting aimlessly, but as it drew closer, the crew could see that there were figures on board. But these figures were not human, they were ghostly, transparent beings, floating through the air. The crew of the freight ship watched in horror as the ghostly ship sailed past them, disappearing back into the fog. But the encounter was not over. As the crew tried to make sense of what they had just seen, they heard strange noises coming from below deck. The sound of chains rattling, and whispers in a language they didn't recognize. One by one, the crew members started to disappear. They were dragged down into the depths of the ship by invisible hands, never to be seen again. Captain John was the only one left. He tried to steer the ship towards safety, but it was no use. The phantom ship had taken control, and it was heading straight for a rocky coastline. Just as the freight ship was about to crash into the rocks, the storm subsided. The fog lifted, and the ghostly ship disappeared into the night. Captain John was the only survivor, but he was never the same again. He spent the rest of his life haunted by the memory of the phantom vessel, and the ghostly figures that had claimed the lives of his crew. The moral of the story is that the sea can be a mysterious and dangerous place, and there are things out there that are beyond our understanding. It's important to respect the power of the ocean and to always be prepared for the unexpected. Samantha was thrilled when she received a beautiful antique doll as a gift from her grandmother. The doll had porcelain skin, curly blonde hair, and a lacy dress that Samantha couldn't take her eyes off of. She placed the doll on her bed and went to sleep. That night, Samantha woke up to find the doll sitting on her chest, staring at her with lifeless eyes. She screamed and pushed the doll away, but it just kept coming back. Every night, Samantha would wake up to find the doll sitting on her chest, sometimes with its hand around her neck. She tried to get rid of the doll, but it would always find its way back to her. One night, Samantha had had enough. She grabbed the doll and threw it out the window. She watched as the doll fell to the ground, shattering into a million pieces. But the next morning, Samantha woke up to find the doll back in her room, good as new. She was terrified, but couldn't bring herself to get rid of it again. The doll seemed to take on a life of its own. It would move from room to room, and Samantha could hear its soft footsteps in the hallway at night. Sometimes, she would catch a glimpse of the doll out of the corner of her eye, only to turn and find it was gone. One day, Samantha's grandmother came to visit. When she saw the doll, her face turned white as a sheet. "Where did you get this doll?" her grandmother asked. "It was a gift from you," Samantha replied. Her grandmother shook her head. "I never gave you that doll. That doll has been in our family for generations, and it's been known to be haunted." Samantha was terrified. She immediately got rid of the doll, and never saw it again. But even to this day, she can still feel its presence in her house. The moral of the story is that some objects can hold a dark energy, and it's important to be careful about what we bring into our homes. What may seem like a harmless antique could actually be something much more sinister. It was Halloween night, and a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned house at the end of the street. The house had been empty for years, and was said to be haunted. As they walked through the creaky old front door, the teens immediately felt a chill run down their spines. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the dusty floorboards. They made their way through the dimly lit rooms, peering into old cupboards and drawers. Suddenly, they heard a loud thumping sound coming from upstairs. They cautiously climbed the staircase, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they reached the top of the stairs, they saw a door at the end of the hallway slowly creaking open. They hesitated for a moment, then slowly made their way towards the open door. Inside, they saw a room covered in cobwebs, with an old chest sitting in the center. They cautiously approached the chest and opened it, revealing a small, old-fashioned music box. One of the teens wound up the music box, and a soft melody began to play. Suddenly, the room started to shake, and the teens felt as if they were being pulled in different directions. They tried to run, but their feet were glued to the ground. As the music box continued to play, they saw a figure materialize in front of them. It was the ghost of the former owner of the house, who had died years ago. The ghost warned them to leave the house immediately, or suffer the same fate as him. Terrified, the teens ran out of the house and never looked back. Years later, the abandoned house was demolished, and a new house was built in its place. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the haunting melody of the music box, and the ghostly voice of the former owner warning visitors to stay away. The moral of the story is that some places may be abandoned for a reason, and it's important to respect the history and potential dangers that may be associated with them. Once upon a time, there was a young couple who moved into a new house. They were thrilled to have found such a beautiful and spacious home, but they soon realized that something wasn't quite right. Every night, they heard strange noises coming from the attic. At first, they tried to ignore them, but they soon became too loud and too frequent to ignore. The couple tried to investigate the noises, but every time they climbed up to the attic, they found nothing out of the ordinary. One night, as they were lying in bed, the couple heard a sound of footsteps coming from the attic. They were too scared to investigate, so they decided to call the police. When the police arrived, they searched the attic but found nothing. Frustrated and frightened, the couple decided to sleep in the guest room that night. However, as they were lying in bed, they heard the same footsteps again, this time coming from the hallway outside their bedroom door. The couple panicked and tried to lock the door, but it wouldn't budge. The footsteps grew louder and louder until they stopped right outside the door. Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn slowly. The couple screamed and shouted for help, but nobody could hear them. Eventually, the doorknob stopped turning, and the footsteps faded away. The couple never found out what happened that night, but they never slept in that house again. Legend has it that the house was haunted by the ghost of a previous owner who died in the attic. The ghost was angry and didn't want anyone else living in his house. As the sun began to set and the last bit of light disappeared from the sky, Sarah realized she was lost. She had been walking through the dense forest for hours, her feet aching and her stomach growling. Her phone was dead, and she had no map or compass to guide her way. The only thing she could do was keep moving forward. As she walked, the trees grew thicker and the sounds of the forest grew quieter. The only thing she could hear was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the rustling of the branches in the wind. The darkness was starting to set in, and Sarah realized she was completely alone in the woods. Suddenly, she heard a twig snap behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she picked up her pace, hoping to get out of the forest as quickly as possible. But then she heard it again, the sound of footsteps following her. She turned around again, but once more there was no one there. Her mind was playing tricks on her, she told herself. But the footsteps continued, getting closer and closer. Panic set in as she started to run, the footsteps quickening behind her. She didn't know how long she ran for, but eventually, she tripped and fell to the ground. As she picked herself up, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. She could hear a low growling sound coming from whatever was staring at her. She tried to crawl away, but it was no use. The creature pounced on her, and Sarah knew she was done for. The next morning, the search party found Sarah's lifeless body lying in the forest. They searched for signs of what had killed her, but all they found were deep claw marks on her back. No one ever knew what attacked her that night, but the people of the town avoided that forest like the plague from then on. It was a beautiful summer day, and 4 friends had decided to go for a hike in the forest. They had been walking for a while when they noticed that the birds had stopped singing, and the forest had become eerily quiet. They shrugged it off and continued walking until they stumbled upon a clearing. In the middle of the clearing, they saw a strange creature. It was about the size of a large dog, but it had scales like a reptile and glowing yellow eyes that seemed to follow their every move. It moved with an unnatural grace, as if it was stalking its prey. The friends froze in fear as the creature began to approach them. It was fast and agile, and they knew they had no chance of outrunning it. They tried to back away slowly, but the creature kept advancing. Suddenly, one of the friends had an idea. He remembered reading somewhere that predators are often scared off by loud noises. He quickly took out his phone and played a loud rock song at full volume. To their surprise, the creature flinched and backed away. The friends took advantage of the creature's momentary hesitation and ran as fast as they could back to their car. As they drove away, they could see the creature in their rearview mirror, still watching them with its glowing eyes. To this day, the friends never spoke of their encounter with the mysterious predator in the forest. They knew that no one would believe them, and they didn't want to risk encountering it again. But every time they go hiking, they can't help but feel like they are being watched by the creature lurking in the shadows. The man who lived in the penthouse apartment of the high-rise complex was a mystery to many of the building's occupants. No one knew his name, and he was rarely seen out in public. The only indication that he even existed was the occasional glimpse of him in his apartment window, peering out into the night with a menacing glare. As the weeks went on, rumors began to circulate about the man's strange behavior. Some claimed to have seen him pacing back and forth in his apartment, muttering to himself in a language that no one could understand. Others swore that they had seen him performing strange rituals in his living room, surrounded by candles and other mysterious objects. Despite the rumors, no one could say for sure what the man was up to. But one thing was certain, his presence had a chilling effect on the other tenants of the building. Some began to avoid the elevators, opting instead to take the stairs, while others made a point of locking their doors at night and drawing their blinds. One night, however, a young woman who lived on the same floor as the man heard a strange noise coming from his apartment. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to be emanating from deep within the building's walls. The woman listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest, as the growling grew louder and more menacing. Suddenly, the noise stopped, and the woman was left standing there in the silence, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She tried to convince herself that she had imagined the whole thing, that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but deep down she knew that something was very wrong. Over the next few weeks, the strange noises and unsettling behavior continued. More and more tenants reported seeing the man in his window at night, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Some even claimed to have seen him walking around the building in the dead of night, as if searching for something or someone. Finally, one evening, the police were called to the building, responding to a disturbance in the penthouse apartment. When they arrived, they found the man's apartment empty, save for a few scattered pieces of paper and strange symbols etched into the walls. The man was never seen again, and no one knew what had become of him. To this day, the tenants of the high-rise building still speak in hushed tones about the mysterious man who lived in the penthouse. Some believe that he was a sorcerer, dabbling in dark magic and calling forth demons from other realms. Others think that he was something even more sinister, a being from another dimension, who had somehow slipped into our world through a portal in his apartment. No one knows for sure what the man was up to, but one thing is certain: his presence has left a lasting mark on the building, and the people who lived there will never forget the terror that he brought with him.